So, and for those I won't be seeing again, don't let the door, I don't leave home without it. Oh, when he goes, he goes. This morning, 3 o'clock. I gotta go out. What are you doing? Tried all night. All right, off we go. So this is the section. It doesn't take long. It is really the peripheral nervous system, but because you see them on any brain, including the sheep brain, this is what the sheep brain are very small. For those, if you're obviously not online, you can't tell. But I mean, you see it, it's relatively small. It's probably a quarter of the size of ours, maybe even a little less. Okay, that's there, but you'll see the convolutions and things. And when you take it out and rinse it off, and understand these are packed in what's called Carasafe. What's interesting about Carasafe is it used to be everything was in formaldehyde. It was awful. You had to do it under the hood. When we learned about how nasty formaldehyde is. And so now this is a product made by Carolina. It's perfectly safe. Doesn't hurt your hands, doesn't hurt your eyes, that type of stuff. I would still rinse it off. Theoretically, you can dispose of it even in a regular garbage can. It's not considered hazardous waste. For form, I put them in the hazardous waste things. I mean, I don't feel comfortable, having an incident because, oh my God, there's biological waste. Because, whoever's emptying it may not know that in a traditional garbage. So I try to take it that way. So it's sort of a rite of passage, and it's something you're going to learn. For those particularly who are pursuing a nursing course, you do this all the time. It's part of doing a physical assessment, cranial nerves. It's what they do on the sideline in a football game for years. Now they have a lieutenant because it's distracting, particularly if they want somebody, people are entirely too curious these days. So these are 12 pairs of cranial nerves going from top to bottom. Probably you'll only see typically 2 or 3 of these. You certainly see the top remnants of the top 2. And you may or may not see the third. And I've seen them as low as the 6th and little filaments as well. There's a mnemonic to learn to, and when I do this in AP2, depending on who you have, it's not hard. You make up something clever or something funny, and you just use the first letters. We do that for mnemonics all the time. It's like we did with the bones. So, I mean, I've taught them so long, none of these really excite me, okay? This is the view, and if you're in lecture with me today, we looked a little bit at this view of sort of the undersurface of the brain, sort of like if you're looking at the brain this way from underneath. And what you will see on the undersurface here, these are the olfactory nerves. This is the first cranial nerve, smell. It's very large compared to the others. The bulbs are very distinctive in the sheep. Animals have a much better sense of smell and a disproportionately larger apparatus than you and I do. They use smell all the time. It's like my dog. If I make something in the kitchen, all of a sudden I have a companion. Oh, what are we having? Oh, really? I like that. He's like, because now he puts his head like this on my plate. Does your dog do that too? Yeah, he just needs like a little tin cup and pencils because all he does is bake. Oh, please. You will see this, the remnant of, maybe not quite as distinctive, this is called the optic chiasm. The inputs there are optic nerves. And really these are the 2 highest ones. This one goes, if you were with me in lecture, this is the olfactory nerve is why we can use smelling salts. It goes right, and it'll stimulate your brain, and it will stimulate something called the reticular activating system, which makes us awake or alert, just like making a loud noise or a bright light or something like that. The optic nerve is right below it. It's in a very important area. These will not have the pituitary. I have one that does have that apparatus. I can sort of show it to you a bit. That's there. So the pituitary will be, and this is a very critical area that you'll learn about. This is where the sella turcica was. If you think of it in the skull, in that area that I asked everybody about, because you have the optic chiasm, you have the pituitary gland, and not shown here, you have the blood supply to the brain, which is called the circle of Willis, all clustered in that one area. So it's exceedingly important. As we work our way down, now you get into, these are nerves that are much more about autonomic function, meaning we don't control them. The third one here, which is called oculomotor. Motor means moves, oculo for eye. And this one we do control because that's the nerve that lets you move your eyes up, down, side to side. I'll give you a little formula on how to remember those. You can't get a question about those wrong. There's a formula. I learned this, I don't know, 50 years ago. All that says is you're old. And then we have here another nerve that you do have control over. Again, moves your eyes, as is this one. This is called trochlear. This is abducens. This is very important. It's called trigeminal. It's large. It's personal to me because my wife has a significant dysfunction with it, which you don't want to have. And then as we get down here, now we have facial, to move your facial muscles. So you do have control. But as you get farther, hearing and balance, swallowing, and governing your internal organs, somebody can stick out your tongue with one. So there's a certain amount of motion. But as the farther down you get into what's called the brainstem, the worse it is. When those don't work, it's a big problem. Because you're meaning you're compromising an area that if it's damaged, it's very difficult to recover from. So that's the point. Couple of inaccuracies on this chart. First thing, PS means parasympathetic. Whoever, I don't know if or when Dr. Robbins is doing this, he may save it for AP2. I do it at the end of AP1. Parasympathetic is part of autonomic. It's something we don't control. 4 of the cranial nerves have parasympathetic function, basically controlling glands. Okay? The third, called the oculomotor, does more than just move your eyes. It also has a glandular element. And that glandular element is very significant. It does have, it's mostly motor. All of these, with the exception of olfactory and optic, even if it says no sensory, that's inaccurate. If you remember in class my discussion, for those that were there, of what are called proprioceptors. Those are little sensors in all of your structures, bones, muscles, ligaments, vital structures that tell you where they're. I mean, if I tell you to close your eyes, you know, is your tongue in your mouth or sticking out? Okay? You know, if you, you don't have to think of which way your eyes are pointing. You know, maybe they're pointing straight ahead. Maybe you're looking down at a computer screen or a laptop. Maybe you're looking at your friend. Maybe you're looking up at the board. You don't have to. You know where they are. So there are tiny sensors in your eyes, in your facial structures, in other structures that tell you where they are. Okay? So this is inaccurate about sensory. Back to parasympathetic. Oculomotor is very important because it controls, when I get to it, we'll go through it, it controls the structures that open and close the pupil of your eye. And that's something everybody examines in a neurological survey. Very important. It's a really important tell. It's going to be a little longer than I thought. Okay? Other than these, facial involves glandular function. Okay? And these are salivary glands, glossopharyngeal, salivary glands. And the vagus, very difficult to test because that's the longest of the cranial nerves. And what happens, it controls your heart, your digestive system, respiration, etc. So it's the only one that goes outside the head and neck and affects you and affects multiple systems. So there's a lot here. The only ones that are purely sensory, 1 and 2, all the others are what we call mixed, meaning they have both motor and some sensory, even though they don't tell you. Okay? They're mixed. Olfactory. Remember, we looked at the ethmoid, the cribriform plate. It has little perforations called cribriform foramina. And so it's all about smell. The bulbs, which are the ganglia, really the switching stations that direct the signal, sit on top of that. That's the cribriform plate. Little fibers go down, we test smell with it. Most of the time, you don't have to do that. The impact is smelling salts. Okay? You can have somebody sniff something, but smelling salts are really useful if someone is easiest thing to see if they're comatose or unconscious, to see if you could quickly revive them. Okay, and I told my classes, it was mandated that we had them in treatment rooms in medical offices for a long time. I haven't run an office for more than 20 years. So I can't tell you what the laws. I mean, when I go to my doctor's office examining them, I don't see it. So maybe it's different. Okay. And my doctor's office said that's been hospital. So I mean, I suppose that if they were supposed to be there, they'd have them. Okay. Optic. We'll go into this, or you will both also in AP2 with vision. The retinas are the sensors. They're in your eyeballs. The signal come back, and 90% of it crisscrosses. Okay, 90% from the right eye goes left, from the left eye goes right. That's how the system works. So that crossover network is the optic chiasm. The fact that 10% doesn't gives you depth perception. So that you're as long as we call it stereoscopic vision. So I normally, somebody who's missing an eye or has a patch, and my brother-in-law lost an eye in the Navy many, many years ago in the Vietnam era. Okay, you have to learn. You can still drive and do all that kind, much more handy than I am. But it's almost like you have to know where stuff is. So there's a learning process that goes on with it. So here, the retina, they're coming in 90% crossover. They go to a structure called the thalamus, which is over here. And then basically, here's the chiasm. This is the tract. This is called the radiation. Takes you back to the visual area in the back of the head, on the back of your skull here. These next three nerves, 3, 4, not 5, 6, okay? They are all muscles that innervate or called the extraocular structures. The eye, these are muscles I don't do until now. This is an eyeball to the nose. You have 6 muscles that move your eyeball up and down, side to side. Okay? They're called the extraocular muscles. All you have to do is they're outside the eye, they're not inside of it. They're attached to the outer structures. We do an eye dissection in AP2. They are 3, 4, and 6. 3 has the most activity, 4 and 6 are very specific. The muscles have names. These 4, superior, inferior, lateral, and medial, if they're small and straight, they're called rectus. So you have superior rectus, I'll abbreviate, lateral rectus, inferior rectus, medial rectus. These come at an angle. They're called obliques. Okay, superior oblique and inferior oblique. Here's the magic formula for every test in anatomy. LR6, SO4, 3. It's like a chemistry class. Except it means lateral rectus is innervated by the 6th, superior oblique by the 4th, all the rest by the 3rd. Box it. That's what I do. Can we write on the test? Only grades. First thing you got to do in an anatomy test, LR6, SO4, 3. Just write it down. Did you do that stuff? I do that stuff. I'm supposed to be good at this. I was like you. No. We were doing a lot of inappropriate substances back then. That era. It was right after an event called Woodstock. Maybe you heard of it. I did. The statute of limitations is passed. I'm just saying. Don't worry about going on spring break. You just could go sit there and go anywhere. Oh, come on. Your parents, your grandparents did that. Don't give me a hard time. Somebody was at Woodstock. Somebody's running around without their clothes on. I'm telling you, rolling around in mud. They were doing that. I'm sure. Okay. So here are the tests. First one, smelling salts. Second one is the optic area, the second cranial. How many fingers? Look, if there are more than 5, and you're only holding up one hand, there's a problem. Okay? The rest of these are up, down, side to side. And you can and you look, and what you look for is symmetry, meaning you look to see the same on both sides. So here, all 3 of those structures go through the same opening. The optic nerve goes through that optic canal I asked you about. The superior orbital fissure, that gash inside the orbit going this way, 3, 4, and 6, and part of 5 goes through. So it's a big opening. They all go through the same place. They all affect these areas. So basically, you'll see this is 6 coming through here. I'll back up. Here's 4. The only one that starts in the back of the brain stem, going through the superior orbital fissure. So superior oblique, it goes up that way. Also known as the trochlear nerve. And here's the big one, 3. From the midbrain, goes to multiple structures, and this is called the ciliary ganglia. So whenever you see somebody, and you're going to carry, many of you in nursing are going to carry this around. Not a marker, you're going to have a pen light. Once you do, room is darkened, you're doing an evaluation, you'll bring the light, and if you bring the light towards somebody's eyes, what happens? Okay, the pupils will constrict. Okay, so they constrict because there's too much light. When you pull the light away, it opens. It doesn't matter where you bring it in from this side or this side. Both sides should either constrict or open, which is called dilate, and they should do so at the same speed. If it's asymmetric, if one's sluggish or too fast, it's a problem. Okay, that is called pupils are equally reactive to light. And the other thing you do with that, you don't have to have the light on. You can just take a pencil, a marker, or an object in your hand, and tell somebody, look at this, and you bring it close to their nose. Their pupils constrict, and their eyes come together. That's called accommodation. So the acronym for that, you'll see it on charts, is PEARL. Pupils are equally reactive to light and accommodation. That's what they're doing at the 10 football. That's part of the concussion protocol. They started with giving somebody an address, not like one Main Street, but it's more complicated. It's like you find an address, it's got multiple numbers and letters, and you tell them, remember this, and then at the end, you ask them to remember it. Kind of how it works. And a variety of things like that. Count back from 100 by 7s, see how far you can go. I'm good to 86. If you guys actually smiled, I'd be happy. When it doesn't control these, you get a certain degree of cross-eye, okay, called strabismus. My middle son, who's a very good athlete, had that. We were all worried about it. Took him to an eye specialist when he was like 3 years old. He goes, a champion tennis player from years ago who won the French Open and the US Open 3 times each, named Yvonne Lendl, had a worse case of cross-eye. So it's more cosmetic in a lot of people than functional. My kid he just wears glasses, which he should wear more than he does. So 3 is the oculomotor, 4, and then 6. I saved 5, the largest, thickest. It's 3 nerves. They use the Roman numerals. That's commonly used for these. It's called trigeminal because there's 3 of them. And we call them V1, V2, and V3 because even though we know it's a Roman numeral for 5, colloquially in a hospital, it's V1, V2, and V3. V1 goes through the superior orbital fissure. Here's some other foramina. V2, the foramen rotundum. V3 for the foramen ovale. Why I ask you about these things. Okay, all of them are sensory, sensation, and you can see the illustration. Ophthalmic area here for V1, maxillary area here. So this is the ophthalmic nerve or the ophthalmic branch, the maxillary branch. This is the mandibular branch. Okay, it's quite large. It also innervates the muscles of mastication. You have four muscles, temporalis, masseter, medial and lateral pterygoids, that allow you to chew, protrude your jaw, go side to side, pull it back. Very important. Here's the problem. Not a lot of people have this called tic douloureux, trigeminal neuralgia. Inflame at where it exits, this very large ganglia, which is really three. Excruciating pain, stabbing pain, seconds to minute, relentless, occurring hundreds of times a day, unprovoked. Brush your teeth, blow your nose, a breeze. If you're familiar with Cranberry up at the Costco there, we live in Cranberry. I get out of the car, it's always windy up there. I start to walk, she's next to me. All of a sudden I hear something and I look back, she's on the ground. Breeze hit her. The pain was so excruciating, she dropped away. Scout's on her. This was in the last 10 years. She takes a medicine, she takes 2 pills 3 times a day, a medicine called Tegretol, which is actually a seizure medicine, and we don't even know why it works. And she lives with that every day. Sometimes she can't eat or drink for long periods of time. There may be some impact with herpetic infection, with oral herpes, which 90% of us have. It's not anything unusual. Just saying. So you understand that's why this is important. It's very hard. How you test it, move the jaw muscles. Your muscles are strong. If I put my hand here and hold it, you should be able to open and close your mouth easy. Your muscles should be able to move against fairly moderate to pretty strong resistance. That's how you muscle test. Almost done. Facial nerve is the opposite. Facial nerve, well, those are all sensation to your face. This is moving your face, smiling, winking, forming words, all from the facial nerve. Stylomastoid foramen. It branches 5 different ways, and you'll see here, I don't ask you to remember these. It has the glandular function is here, salivary glands under your tongue and in the chin area, called sublingual and submandibular, are really what it innervates. So dry mouth would be a sign of it, conceivably, but it's fairly easy to tell. Ask somebody to blink or move their eyes or smile. And again, bilateral and symmetrical. There is a significant disease that you will all see, and you probably know someone who has it, called Bell's palsy. It is very common. Anything. It could be trauma, it could be infection, it could be tumor, it could be viruses. It could sometimes just happen. And somebody have a cold, and then a couple of weeks of stress can bring it on. We really don't know what causes it. Paralysis, typically temporary, one side of the face. It can happen overnight. Most likely, there's a good chance it relates to herpetic infections again. Sometimes people will permanently have a droop there. My residency director was a mentor of mine, had that from when he was a kid. I mean, a man in his 90s now, but even then, maybe a man in his 50s or 60s who had that, and never, because I don't think they knew a lot about it. My brother-in-law got that, probably more stress-related. He was a 9/11 operator in the city of Pittsburgh. And I mean, that's a high-stress occupation when you're calling somebody breaking in or somebody's dying, and you got to try to. It didn't help because he had a problem with alcohol afterwards with regard to that, and I think that might have contributed to it. But good now. So the only nerve that doesn't exit, this goes in. Remember that external acoustic meatus? You have one on the inside called the internal. The nerve, this is the nerve that goes for balance and hearing. So it's, again, 2 nerves wrapped and run. We used to call it the auditory, but now we know it has to do with balance, called the vestibulocochlear nerve. We basically do hearing testing. This is the cochlea for hearing. The semicircular canals are the vestibular portion. They're like a carpenter's level, would be the best analogy. And basically, whenever you're moving your head, you're able to make adjustments and compensate for that as long as that's working. The last thing you want to have is a problem here. This is a horrible, deafness is part of this. There's an autoimmune disease called Meniere's disease that affects structures in this area. You wouldn't wish it on your worst enemy. So the last 4, 9, 10, 11, and 12, are all in the brainstem and the medulla oblongata. Glossopharyngeal, salivary glands, your parotid glands. It allows you to swallow. It basically innervates the constrictors that are there. The facial nerve is sensory to the anterior 2/3 of your tongue. You think of your skull the way we did in cranial, we did parts of the brain, the bones, facial and cranial. The tongue has a facial and a throat portion. The facial portion, the anterior 2/3, facial nerve for taste. The posterior 1/3 is more in your throat, glossopharyngeal, plus a lot of really important receptors that govern heart rate, respiration, blood pressure are innervated by that. Interestingly, just see if somebody could swallow. So there's a lot going on with that. It's a fear of, inflamed, impaired swallowing and taste that's there. Who knows? Maybe that's something, I'm speculating entirely. With a lot of people here with COVID had difficulty tasting things, and it persisted for a period of time. When my wife had it, didn't impact that. The vagus, it gets its name because of vagabond, because it wanders around. It's the only one. It's the jugular foramen as it exits, which is the same thing for the glossopharyngeal, jugular foramen. And what it does, parasympathetic is the one, heart, lungs, internal organs, lots of receptors. Also has taste buds down deep inside your throat. It also innervates your larynx. So when someone gets a head trauma and then all of a sudden they're hoarse, that's a give. That's a tell. So one of the things, again, they test for that. They ask somebody, and you have somebody speaking, all of a sudden they're hoarse, and they've had potentially a concussion. That's suspicious. And the last two, the only one that has a spinal component, comes up through the foramen magnum, exits through the jugular foramen, is called the accessory, also known as the spinal accessory nerve. It's pretty much all muscular, and it has to do, shrug your shoulders. Trapezius muscle and the axillary muscles, the deltoid muscle. That's how that works. So that's really test. Put your hand on somebody's shoulder and see if they can shrug it. And then lastly, and most famously, the hypoglossal, for those hypoglossal canals in the occipital bone, sticking out your tongue. The accessory nerve, the hypoglossal nerve, if it's damaged, it's that side. When you tell somebody to stick out their tongue, they stick it out straight. Like if somebody routinely sticks it out sideways, they're probably just fooling around. So say, oh, stick it out straight, put your tongue back in. If they say, I am sticking out straight, it deviates to the affected side. Same thing with that shrugging your shoulders. If one side weak, that's where the problem is, not opposite as so many other things are. All little goodies, that's what they do. Years ago, before we had all the concussion problems with sport, it was, if you pass those tests, hey, go back in the game. Now it's a whole lot different. It's a lot. Now you have a much more elaborate protocol because so many players have concussion-related problems. They have this chronic traumatic brain encephalitis. That really from studies here in Pittsburgh really had a lot to do with it. That really have pointed out the change in that. And I commented on that in one of the classes today with one of my students who went to the doctor, is Dr. Morone, who was from Allegheny General, who was part of that. The ends of the cranial nerves, you're done. Now, pardon me for squeaking. And let me do this part. So I don't know what's on this video. I just grabbed one, but I'll show it to you. I don't think we'll have any sound. Hopefully I won't have any ads. Looks like it's doing stuff. So let me open it up. And I'll just, the ones you're showing here do not have the Dura. I have one with it. If you're interested, use it. You may remember from class, the dura is much thicker than you think. And this transverse fissure is the divide between the cranial, the cerebral lobes and the cerebellum, very distinctive. And so it covers up the area of the lines, and it's strong. Dura is just that, durable. That's where it gets its name. I cover that in lecture. So as we move on, I'm just transitioning rather than spend 10 minutes with one of these. Well, make me look good. And that's, now you're stemming, and you won't see a whole lot with that, I don't think. So only one will have to take off the dura. When you take it off, you get this. This is where that transverse fissure was. Okay? This is the area where you should make a cut going straight down through here. There's the longitudinal fissure. The cerebellum is very distinctive. Like I said, the gyri and sulci, the convolutions are different. Before you cut into it, before you would take a knife and go through it this way, down that, take a look in there. You'll see something I commented on. If you had these in class, if you didn't, they're called the colliculi, those mounds on the back of the midbrain. Like when you make a sound and you move your head, or light, they're sight and sound reflexes. They're bigger than you think. In between them is a single structure, that's the pineal gland. It's pronounced pineal because it looked like a pine cone. So you can look at that as well. The vermis is just the sort of the central structure on that. I had a very good neurology professor when I was in school. I mean, I wish I had listened, been more attentive to what he was saying. Now, this is what you'll see. This is what you would see now with everything pulled away, the undersurface, the olfactory bulbs, the optic chiasm. You would see in the sheep, rather than having a pair of mammillary bodies, it typically has one. This is where the pituitary would be. These are the tracts called the peduncles that are coming out from the cerebral cortex. This, you'll see the oculomotor nerve, that LR6SO43, the 3 part of it. You'll see here, as you get below this is, and they're a little off with this, to tell you the truth. The pons probably starts a little bit lower. This is midbrain is here and maybe extends to here. The pons a little lower, and the medulla is lower still, I think. But maybe that's just the labeling that's there. The infundibulum is right under the optic chiasm. The pituitary, that's the stalk, so to speak, that the pituitary hangs off of. We're moving again. And again, you can look at it from your side. What you'll see on the side, you'll see this area. That's that lateral sulcus. This is probably, they're trying to approximate the central sulcus for motor versus, and it's very hard. I think it's probably a little farther back. That's the temporal lobe. That's the lateral sulcus area. You can see it fairly distinctly, I think, on the sheet. Now, this is the hemisection. So this, and you slice it all the way through, including the cerebellum. Famously, and I didn't get to cerebellum in both classes, this is called the arbor vitae. It's white matter. The cerebellum has more connections than any other part of your brain. All your muscle and motor activities coordinate through there. What's interesting about it, when anatomists looked at that, they saw this tree-like structure of white matter that you will see, and they called it the tree of life, arbor vitae. That's what that means. So I feel compelled to mention in class, that's the name. In Judaism, that is an important name for Judaic studies. That was the name of the synagogue, or is, up in Squirrel Hill, where that tragedy occurred with the shooter 4 years ago. And I mentioned to everybody, a high school classmate of mine was Dr. Jerry Rabinowitz, who was killed in that, as he ran to the gunfire. The people needed help. That was the person. So he and I graduated high school together. Very, very, very. So I always mention it. I was married at that time, 1979. First time. Just saying. So you'll see the lateral ventricle. I talked about that in class. That natural divide. If you look inside there, you see gray matter, basal ganglia. You'll see cortex on the outside, white matter, the corpus callosum on top of it, very distinctively. This area is the third ventricle. This is the thalamus, part of the diencephalon. The hypothalamus, very small. The epithalamus, a little larger. Pituitary, if it was there, you would see it, but most of the time it's not. Colliculi are back here. Superior is more visible. And so you can see, sometimes you can see that gash where it's midbrain is the cerebral aqueduct. That's why this lower is pons, and they had it labeled before. And this is more medulla down here. So you can watch somebody do it. We should have a couple groups doing this. I think it'd be a good idea. I don't think there's a lot else. There's the arbor vitae in the cerebellum. That large area is the fourth ventricle. That's where the cerebrospinal fluid goes out. And this is where they did some slices to be able to look at this. Like they took the front part of the brain, be here and make a little slice, and you can see the ventricles. And you certainly can do that. And I think that's everything. Yeah, let me just answer this text real quick. We'll get you out of here in 20 minutes, half an hour. Poor kid. Broke up with his girlfriend, and he's got to move into a new place. He's a mess. Right. There are dissecting trays here. There are gloves here. There are dissecting kits. My advice is it's usually easier to use sharp knife rather than dull knife. Some of these, if you need to change the blade on the knife, let me do. I'm good at that. I don't want you getting cut. I've changed a lot of them, but they have to be the ones where they slide on, not screw on. So far, I'm only seeing one of those. But other than that, some of these kits are going to have knives. I have plenty of replacement blades. No shortage. If you want me to change it, I'll change it. There are pins here. There are scissors here. There are forceps here. Forceps are tweezers, basically. So, I mean, if you can't find the blade, we'll see if we can find it sufficiently sharp. These kits, once we got them, they never put it back together. So up here, if you like, I mean, again, if you make a group of 3 or 4 people, that's fine. If you just want to watch, that's fine. It's going to make you sick, hit the road. So only one of these has the Dura. I'll be glad to demo it if you want to use it. If you don't, that's fine too. Okay. I'll turn that on. So if you need fresh blades, I'll put them on. We have to sort of hunt around and see if I can work with it slide on. Please be fresh. In medicine, blades years ago they used to be sterilized. Now they're just much easier. They're sterilized with radiation. And not anything dangerous with that. So normally when you have just tight handles, those are called number 4 handles, number 3 handles. Go ahead, start. I have a handout. I'm going to get you. We have a handout for you to look at. Some questions. I need a 1-page, a couple of paragraphs to report. If you want to email to me, I've got stuff where you try to identify whatever you can. If it doesn't have the Dura, don't worry about the Dura. Start. Rinse them off. Put some gloves on. I'll be around to help. I have gloves are all sizes. I better turn this off. Let me stop recording.